So yesterday, the Oklahoma Sooners released their depth chart for their game this Friday against Temple, and instantly something stood out to me. Something that we've talked about here on the channel, but something that we definitely need to dive into today. And that's true freshman Jayden Jackson being announced as a starter along this Oklahoma defense, and why this is a name you need to be on the lookout for. But before we can, as always, y'all know the drill. I have got to hear from you. Hop down to the comments, Y for yes, N for no. Are you surprised that Jayden Jackson is starting? And let me know what you're thinking. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe, hit that bell notification as I do constant college football content. You don't want to miss any of it. And by the way, after this video is done, be sure to go check out Conference Call College Football, our new venture and a brand new experience into the college sports and college football world that you are absolutely going to want to be a part of. But having said all that, let's jump right into this. And as I alluded to in the intro, whenever we're talking about some of the new additions that Oklahoma got, we had several conversations about the guys they got on that defensive front, because shoring up that aspect of the team was a key focus for the Sooners defensive staff. When we go back and look at Brent Venables at Clemson and what really made those defenses tick, Todd Bates' defensive lines were exceptionally good whenever they were at Clemson, especially during their national championship runs. So if you mean to replicate the success that you experienced at Clemson from the defensive side of the ball with Todd Bates, with some of these coaches, you start in the trenches, because football is won and lost in the trenches. This is part of the reason why I always bring up Dominic Williams as being one of the transfers that occurred that you have got to keep your eye on, not only for Oklahoma, but also on a national stage. Not long ago, we had a little bit during our live stream where we talked about names all across the country that you needed to know that were transfers that were going to make an immediate impact. Dominic Williams, of course, came up. Shoring up the defensive front, shoring up that interior is a great way to strengthen your defense as a whole. But whenever the depth chart was announced, it wasn't just Dominic Williams' presence that stood out to me. Jayden Jackson, true freshman, a guy who was in high school less than a year ago, is going to be playing alongside him. And really, when you look at that three deep being Jayden Jackson at defensive tackle, then you have your nose of either Dominic Williams or Dejon Terry. Those are three names that you gotta feel real good about. And yes, Jayden Jackson may be a freshman. There are going to be learning experiences along the way, but I also think he's exceptionally gifted. And we've had this conversation multiple times about Jayden Jackson. Though I loved several of the additions they got in recruiting last year, two names to me were just above in terms of what they brought to the table relative to what they were ranked. That was Jayden Jackson. That was Danny Okoye. Because if we look at the composite, Jayden Jackson was just outside the top 300 per 24/7 Sports. But important to note that if you looked at 24/7 Sports rankings themselves, they had him at number 190 in the nation. Even then, I think he was underrated. Whenever you go and watch what he brings to the table, he is a disruptive force from the interior, and he displayed that consistently at IMG, and that gets us into the next part of this conversation. He comes from IMG. Now, we always say this, it is not a guarantee that players that come from schools like IMG, Mater Dei, Bosco, Bishop Gorman, Duncanville, it's not a guarantee that they translate. But you do like your odds, and the reason is quite simple. Because he's practicing against guys that will be playing on Saturdays in college football. He's playing against guys that will be playing on Saturdays in college football on both sides of the ball. I mean, you look at an IMG practice, he's going up against offensive linemen blocking him that'll be playing on Saturdays. So he has an idea of what college football talent looks like, albeit they've never been in a college strength and conditioning room, and we know what an exceptional difference that makes. But at the end of the day, he's not averse to competition. He's not surprised by talent. It's what he has known. So Jayden Jackson came to the Oklahoma Sooners at 6'2", 295 pounds, or at least that's what 24/7 Sports had him listed at in high school. And if we look at the depth chart, they have him listed at 6'2", 312 pounds, really highlighting what I just said about that college strength and conditioning room. They're going to get you right. You're going to shed the bad weight and put on a lot of good weight. So against Temple this week, there are going to be several things I'm excited to see for Oklahoma. And don't get me wrong, it's Temple. I think this is a game that Oklahoma, they show up, they're on their P's and Q's, they go on this business trip, they exit the business trip with a victory. It's not going to be a learning experience for us, but if you are a young player like Jayden Jackson, it can certainly be a learning experience for you. First outing in college football, it really doesn't matter who you play. You were just in high school. This is absolutely a learning experience for you. And yes, some could argue that, hey, Ty, wasn't he just in practice against Oklahoma? So how much of a learning experience is it? There's a massive difference between practicing against your offense, where after a few weeks, you have a pretty good feeling about what's going to happen. You know the structure of that offense, what they want to accomplish, the way they go about it. Whenever you get into a game, you have 4 quarters to start figuring that out. Meaning you're going to see things you didn't see in practice. Now, you've been prepped for these things, sure. But it's different practicing it, and it's different when everything actually starts happening. And let's be very clear here. Jayden Jackson wasn't the only freshman listed on this depth chart. They have several freshmen that are set to contribute, which really speaks to how well Brent Venables and them have been able to recruit. Remember, since Brent Venables got there, top 10 classes have been the standard for Oklahoma, both in terms of traditional recruiting means and in terms of transfer portal acquisitions. But Jayden Jackson is a name that I said not too long ago over on the Bama Standard as we were giving our preview into Alabama's season. Everybody on the Bama Standard agreed, like, hey, do not overlook OU. That's a tough game going to Norman for Alabama. And whenever it got to be my turn, I gave the Bama fans some names to know. I said, listen, this is going to be a beautiful matchup from a schematic standpoint. You have Kalen DeBoer, who's an offensive guru. You have Brent Venables, who's a defensive guru. I mean, that's something that we scheme guys, we love. Being able to get those matchups, sign me up. I wish every single game of the year was like that, where I could see high-level scheme going back and forth. So, but there are some guys on this Oklahoma roster, both offensively, defensively, you need to know. Now, everybody knows Billy Bowman. Everybody knows Danny Stutzman, and certainly that's deserved. 2 phenomenal players. But I said on that channel, Jayden Jackson is a name you can't ignore. This is before I knew he was starting, just because some of the rumblings I had heard from some of our fellow Oklahoma content creators saying, hey, Ty, this kid's looking real good. And in fairness, when you turn on the film from what he did in high school at IMG, it tracks. So for Oklahoma, a lot to be excited about. First season in the SEC, you got some young freshman guys that are looking to contribute. You got some that are starting, and that's always a great way to spike excitement. Let me know who you're most excited for, and heck, might get a video out on them before the season begins, but I'm certainly excited to see what Jayden Jackson does. That's it. See ya.